We are beginning the Sicha from Shemot Chelik Lamed Vav. This is a quite well-known Sicha about the topic of B'tochen and Tracht gut v'zayin gut, think good, and it will be good. And we will start now with chapter 1, or section 1. The Torah first mentions Moshe's actions as an adult in the following narrative. And Moshe became of age, Vayigdal Moshe, Vayetel Echad, he went out to his brethren, Vayarish Mitzri Maki, he saw an Egyptian man beating one of his Hebrew brethren, Vayetel B'yom Hasheni, and he went out on the next day, Vayar, and he saw two Hebrew men quarreling. He said to the wicked one, "Why are you hitting your fellow?" The wicked one replied, "Halorgeni ata omer, kasher raktas hamitzri, do you intend to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" Moshe became frightened and he said, "Vayira Moshe, vayomer achen noida davar," and vayishma Parai, and Parai heard, vayivakish larig as Moshe v'yivrach Moshe, and he sought to kill Moshe, and Moshe fled. So here on the pasuk, Vayira, on the phrase, and Moshe became frightened, Rashi comments, the verse should be understood according to its plain meaning, kipshutai. In other words, that Moshe was scared about the people finding out about his killing the Mitzri and so on, killing the Egyptian. In a similar vein, that this was what his fright was, this is what he was scared about. Additionally, another way of learning Pshat, Rashi says, is alternatively, according to the Medrashi says, that he was worried because he saw wicked informers amongst the Jewish people. He thought, if this is so, perhaps they are not worthy of being redeemed. That was, in other words, the fear was not for his own self. The fear of Moshe Rabbeinu was not about what was going to happen to him, but the fear of Moshe Rabbeinu was what was the reason that the Yidden would not be redeemed. The question arises, why does the plain meaning that Moshe feared for his life, because it had become public knowledge that he killed the Egyptians, not suffice? Why must Rashi also cite the interpretation of the Medrash that Moshe's concern was that his brethren would not deserve to be redeemed, which is not at all alluded to in the verse? It seems to be Rashi, as we know, is out to explain the simple meaning of the text. What's wrong? What's problematic to just say, yes, he was scared. Pari would find out that he killed an Egyptian overseer, he would be in big trouble. And the Rebbe goes further about understanding why Rashi had to bring in the alternate explanation of the Medrash. In particular, this interpretation of Moshe's fear warrants explanation. Why? Because it also necessitates the interpreting the continuation of the verse. And he said, the matter has indeed become known in a non-literal manner. Because of what he just now said, that's why, because of Rashi's explanation in the Medrash, you cannot say that the issue is he was, if you're saying that he was fearful because Pari is going to find out, and now you're saying that people found out about it, so once people found out about it, Pari is going to find out about it. But if you're saying he wasn't fearful for himself, he was scared about what the Klal Yisrael situation is, that it's so severe. Give a look, there's such wicked people that are amongst Klal Yisrael. When he heard that there's such wicked people amongst Klal Yisrael, he feared for Klal Yisrael. So what was that? The matter was known. How do you explain the issue of the matter was known? So he has to explain it in a non-literal manner, instead of its plain meaning that Moshe was concerned about the consequences of his having killed the Egyptian. Another explanation becomes necessary, and you have to say something else. because Achi Noida Dover doesn't make any sense. Behold, the matter was known. That's not an issue if you're fearful about Klal Yisrael's situation being stuck in Golus now. Therefore, he has to, because of this Medrash, he needs to give another additional non-literal explanation on the next part of the pasuk. Therefore, when commenting on the latter phrase, after stating that this phrase should be interpreted plainly, in other words, just like the first phrase, he explained it plainly, and then, according to Medrash, the same thing in the next phrase, behold, it became known, he also, after explains it in the plain sense, he also explains it. Rashi also cites the Midrashic interpretation that the matter became known to me. Not Achi Noida Dover, it became known to people, and now Dasan Aviram knows about it, now Pari is going to know about it, but it became known to me, regarding which I wondered, how did Israel sin so severely to warrant their being subjugated with backbreaking labor? Achi Noida Dover means, because of this, I now found out why are the Eden suffering so terribly in Golus. So in other words, what Rashi is doing is, by bringing in a medrash, he is forcing himself to bring in another medrash and leave the simple meaning of the text in the next part. So the question is, what necessitated Rashi to do that? It is possible to offer a plain resolution to the above questions. Rashi was seeking to address a general difficulty raised by the verse, and Moshe became frightened. Then he said, the matter has indeed become known. Why does the Torah mention this point? After all, Moshe's fear did not lead to any immediate action, for he did not flee to Midian until after Pari heard about the matter and sought to kill him. It doesn't say that Pari heard and then Moshe Rabbeinu was scared. It said Moshe Rabbeinu was scared, just the very fact that Dasan Aviram heard about it. What we're not saying about Moshe Rabbeinu should not have had the emotion of fear, like we're going to speak about later. But what's the point of telling us that Moshe Rabbeinu feared? What's the purpose? What do we learn from this? What's the idea behind it? So the Rebbe says, what do you mean? I could say about the entire story with Dasan Aviram. The point is, we're trying to tell about Moshe Rabbeinu running away to Midian. So I could have said he killed the Mitzri, and Pari heard about it, however it was, and once Pari heard about it, Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away. If you're asking, why does the Torah tell me about Moshe Rabbeinu's fear? So by extension, why don't you ask, why does the Torah talk about Dasan Aviram at all? One might want to raise a similar question. Why is it necessary for the Torah to relate the entire narrative of the interaction between Moshe and the two Israelites? Dasan and Aviram, which is the two people that were arguing. After all, the Torah could merely have related that Pari heard about the killing of the Egyptian, and Moshe fled. The entire episode describing two Hebrew men quarreling, Shnei Anoshim Ivrim Nitzim, and their rebuke of Moshe, who appointed you? Do you intend to kill me? Appears unnecessary. So the Rebbe says, you can't ask on that part. However, in light of Rashi's commentary on the phrase, and Pari heard, Vayishma Pari, Rashi explains something that helps understand why he had to tell us what's said earlier. How did Pari hear about it? The issue is resolved by what Rashi says on Vayishma Pari. There Rashi states, they, meaning Dasan Aviram, informed on him. They told Pari about it. Thus, by recounting Moshe's earlier encounter with them, the Torah lets us know how this report reached Pari. In other words, this part of the story about Dasan Aviram was necessary. You couldn't just jump and say that Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Egyptian and then say Pari heard. But because how did he hear? So he had to tell you, there were two men arguing, and they afterwards informed, like Rashi says, and that's how Pari heard. But it's still the fear part that Moshe Rabbeinu was fearful seemingly has no point whatsoever. And because of that, nevertheless, we are not given an explanation as to why the Torah tells us that Moshe became frightened. To resolve this question, Rashi cites the interpretation of the Medrash, which explains that Moshe's fear was not motivated by concern for his own future. We're not talking about he was fearful for himself according to the Medrash, but rather resulted from his worry that perhaps the Yidden, the Jewish people, were not worthy of redemption. And therefore, it's a very crucial point to speak about Moshe Rabbeinu's fear, because this fear expressed the whole problem that Moshe was facing at that time with the Yidden in Mitzrayim. Okay, we have now explained why Rashi also brings the Medrash in addition to Pshat. Yet, the Rebbe is going to go back and say, but the Pshat meaning, the simple meaning, must also have a special message and idea in it as well. It must be saying something of a teaching lesson, as he's soon going to explain in the way of Drush. Section 2. Our sages taught a verse never departs from its plain meaning, that ein mikra yotzim de pshutai. This principle should certainly apply in the present instance, where Rashi not only gives an alternative, straightforward explanation of Moshe's fear, kipshutai, but presents it before the midrashic interpretation of midrashay. The fact that Rashi chooses, sometimes Rashi will leave out the pshat, sometimes he will say the pshat after the medrash. In this case, he first says the pshat and then he says the medrash. So obviously, we need to be able to study the pasuk with its pshat meaning as well. We must therefore assume that even according to the plain meaning of the phrase, and Moshe became frightened, that he feared for his own life, not that he was fearful about Klal Yisrael's situation. Because it had become known that he killed the Egyptian, there is an explanation, at least according to the approach of Drush, as to why the Torah mentions his fear, meaning there must be a message that we are supposed to derive from the simple meaning. That's what it means, at least according to the approach of Drush, not Medrash, but what we derive. Drush is from the word what we derive, that we derive from this a certain teaching, a certain understanding about what Moshe Rabbeinu went through and how we are supposed to act. To understand the above, let us first cite the comments of the Medrash on the verse in Chumash Breishis. And Yaakov became very frightened and he was distressed when he heard that Esav was coming towards him with 400 men. So over there is the Medrash says as follows. Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rav Reuven, 2 people received promises from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be he. The foremost of the Avos and the foremost of the Nevi'im. And nonetheless, in other words, despite that, they became frightened. The foremost of the Avos, this is Yaakov, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be he, told him, that I will be with you. And behold, I will be with you. And yet ultimately Yaakov became frightened. It says, Vayira Yaakov. The Bechir Sheba Nevi'im, the foremost of the Nevi'im, the prophets, this is Moshe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be him, told him that Ki eya imach, I will be with you. This was by the case of close to the war with Og, yet ultimately Moshe became frightened. This is intimated by the verse, and Hashem told Moshe, do not fear him. He was talking about Og, and it is relevant to offer the reassurance, do not fear him, only to one who fears. So from the fact that Hashem had to tell Moshe, do not fear Og, that means the king of Sichon, Og Melech HaBashan. That means that Moshe Rabbeinu obviously was fearful. So the Medrash is saying that 2 great people, despite their great level and holiness, they were frightened, even though they were told by Hashem not to be frightened. So the question is, what is the Medrash trying to point out of here? Is it a positive reflection on Yaakov Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu? Is it something we're supposed to emulate? Or is the Medrash trying to teach us that this wasn't ideal and we shouldn't emulate it? So the Rebbe says on the top of the page, the commentaries on the Medrash differ regarding the intent of this passage. It Some maintain that the Medrash is praising Yaakov and Moshe. Although they received promises from Hashem, they did not rely on the promise, fearing that perhaps they had sinned and were thus no longer worthy of having Hashem's promise fulfilled. And like we're going to say later on, this was something based on their humility. They were so humble that they believed that they might have somehow, in some way, done something wrong, and therefore lost the power and protection of Hashem that Hashem promised them earlier. So, in other words, this is a good thing. This is a positive thing. This is praiseworthy. However, other commentaries explain that the intent of the Medrash is that one should not learn from their example of Yaakov and Moshe, for one ought not to be afraid. Rather, that one's heart should be settled, trusting in Hashem. This intent is apparent from the plain meaning of the continuation of the Medrash. If we look further on in the words of the Medrash, we see that the interpretation that this is something not ideal and we should not learn a lesson from to do, we should not emulate, is seen from what it says further. It says further, the Medrash, the prophet Yeshayahu, admonishes the Jewish people, telling them, you have forgotten Hashem who made you, and you are continually frightened throughout the day. What does this mean? The obviously, forgetting about Hashem is connected with the being frightened. So forgetting about Hashem is not good. So and you're connecting with being frightened, and this is connected to what we said before about Yaakov and Moshe, meaning the prophet Yeshayahu is rebukes them for being afraid. So therefore, if the prophet is rebuking them for being afraid, and this idea the Medrash is bringing in continuation of Yaakov and Moshe, so we see that this is not a positive thing. The view of the commentaries that one ought not be afraid is worthy of exploration. What is wrong with fearing that one is unworthy of the fulfillment of Hashem's promises because of the effects of one's sins? On the contrary, at first glance, this would appear to be a very positive quality. One's humility is so great, like we mentioned before, that he is always concerned that his avodas Hashem, divine service, is not flawless and that he has sinned. So this seems to be a positive thing. So the Rebbe says, let's broaden this question and examine this in the light of the general idea that we know we have to have bitachon. And here we're going to get into the whole topic of bitachon and how bitachon works, etc. This question thus draws focus to the nature of the attribute of bitachon, trust in Hashem, which we are commanded to pursue. Bitachon is not merely the faith that Hashem has the potential to bestow good upon a person and save him from adversity and the like. Rather, it means that the person trusts that Hashem will actually do this. And his trust is so absolute that he is completely serene and does not worry at all. As Chayvus Halavav states, the essence of bitachon is the serenity felt by the person who trusts. His heart relies on the one in whom he has placed his trust. In other words, in Hashem, that he, Hashem, will do what is best and most appropriate for him, for him in the matter at hand. So the Rebbe goes on to ask, in a similar vein, the grounds for such certainty requires explanation. Even when a person has an explicit promise from Hashem, divine promise, it is possible that sin would cause the promise not to be fulfilled. This surely applies when there is no explicit promise. Moreover, so therefore, if Yaakov had a promise and he was worried because he believed that a sin could undo that, so for sure, us, a regular person whom the Chayvus Al-Vav is addressing, we don't have that open promise that Hashem revealed himself to us and told us he's going to protect us. So if we are to be scared of our sin, how can you come with any kindness to us? How can you complain to us? Moreover, the concern lest sin cause the promise not to be fulfilled is applicable to everyone. It's not just certain people have to be worried about it, but really everyone has to be concerned about it. For there's no righteous man on earth who does only good, does not sin. Ein sadik b'aretz ya'aseh tov lo yechta. If even Yaakov are the one of the others, Yaakov, had this fear, it applies to others, meaning the rest of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, the Rebbe asks, what is the foundation? What's the reasoning? How can we expect that Hashem is always going to do good, doing good for us, that we can completely rely on Hashem that He will do good? So the Rebbe is going to suggest in 3 a possible explanation, but he's afterwards going to say this is not entirely so. Initially, that's what he's saying, at first glance, you could explain, the following explanation could be offered. The concept of B'tochen is based on the emunah, on faith that everything comes from Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thus, when a person encounters distress and misfortune, this is not because of any other factor has control, Rahman al-Islam, Chas v'Shalom, heaven forbid, in any manner whatsoever. Rather, everything comes from above. A person with that awareness is therefore utterly serene, like we quoted before from the Chayvus Alavavis, that B'tochen brings in its wake serenity. Either way, he has no reason to worry, because the opposite of B'tochen is worry. So we're saying when a person believes that everything comes from Hashem, there's no reason to worry. Whatever occurs to him, for if he does not deserve that any evil be visited upon him, certainly Hashem will save him from it. This is true even when there's no natural possibility for him to be saved, for who can say to Hashem, what are you doing? Moreover, he's able to change the laws of nature. So that's one possible outcome. If, on the other hand, he is not worthy of Chazdei Hashem, God's kindness, but instead deserves punishment, his mind is still utterly at ease, because he knows that his misfortune does not result from any side factor, but from Hashem alone, since he did not fulfill his responsibilities to his Creator. He brought him to this distressing situation. In other words, Hashem brought this about because of whatever thing the person may have not done right or done wrong. Therefore, he fears no one but Hashem alone. Moreover, he realizes that this difficulty is for his own good. It's not just that he deserves it, but it's beneficial for him. As is well known, even the punishments ordained by the Torah are expressions of Hashem's kindness, cleansing a person from the blemish of sin. Thus, there's no place for worry or fear, because he knows whatever is being done is coming from Hashem. So what need is there to worry? So the Rebbe goes on, based on this, accordingly, there is no contradiction. A person may have absolute betochen in Hashem, in God, even though he knows that possibly his sin will cause him to be found unworthy of being rescued from the impending misfortune. This knowledge does not detract from his peace of mind, for he realized that whatever happens to him comes from Hashem, comes from God. According to this explanation, we can appreciate the intent of the commentators to the Medrash, who maintain that one ought not be afraid and that we should not learn from the conduct of Yaakov and Moshe, who showed fear. As is evident from the plain meaning of the relevant passages, they feared the immediate cause of their distress. It doesn't say that they were fearing Hashem. They were fearful of the actual person that was behind it. Yaakov was afraid of Esav, as it is written, and Yaakov was very frightened and distressed, and he therefore divided the people after he heard that Esav was coming to him with 400 men. So it was about Esav, not about his connection with Hashem. Similarly, Moshe had to be warned not to fear Oig, Altira Oisoid, like we said before. Do not fear him, meaning Oig. Such fear indicates that something was lacking in the consummate betochen in God and Hashem, and therefore that was why the Medrash says that it was not correct and not right that they were fearful. We should not learn from them. But the Rebbe says as we said before, this is just an initial explanation. This doesn't get to the root of what bitachon is about. He says in number 4, this explanation is, however, insufficient, for it is obvious that the essence of bitachon goes beyond merely attaining the peace of mind that comes from the awareness that everything is ordained by the hand of Hashem. Instead, it means that the person who has bitachon trusts that he will receive visible and manifest good, meaning that Hashem will rescue him from his difficulties. That's what bitachon means. Not, if Hashem rescues me, I'm calm. And even if Hashem doesn't rescue me, I'm also calm because it's from Hashem. That's not the meaning of bitachon. Bitachon means I'm confident. I trust that Hashem will take me out of this. But according to the above explanation, however, it appears that this plain meaning of bitachon, that I'm confident that Hashem will take me out of this trouble, is beyond the reach of the majority of Jewish people. As we mentioned before the pasuk, since there's no righteous man on earth who does only good and does not sin. So who can judge himself as being worthy of Hashem's visible and apparent kindness? Hence, for most people, bitachon would be reflected primarily in the peace of mind that results from their awareness that even if they're not worthy of Chazdei Hashem divine beneficence, everything comes from Hashem and is for their good, even if that good is not visible and manifest. And according to this approach, only perfectly righteous men whose divine service, the avodas Hashem, has reached the consummate perfection, and therefore do not have to worry about the possible effects of sin, can trust they will receive manifest and apparent good. So this is the problem with this is that this is a very unusual way of defining bitachon, especially if we look at the words of the Chovos HaLevavos about bitachon. Such a conception, however, runs contrary to the approach of the author of Chovos HaLevavos, who states in his explanation of the circumstances in which bitachon is conceivable. It's a certain subsection of his section on bitachon, that the one who is trusted is infinitely magnanimous and kind towards whoever is deserving and to whoever is not. It's italicized over there. It's not just, bitachon is not just for tzaddikim. It's even for those undeserving. Moreover, his magnanimity is constant and his kindness is continuous, never ceasing and never severed. According to this view, the concept of bitachon is based on the principle that Hashem bestows manifest kindness even towards one who is not deserving, which doesn't fit in what we spoke about before. So we can't say the previous explanation, but it leaves open to question, what's the reasoning behind the Chovos HaLevavos then? This requires explanation. After all, even though Hashem's mercy extends also to someone who is not deserving, is it not possible that a person may be deserving of punishment for his undesirable deeds? What is the conceptual foundation for a person's trust that Hashem will act benevolently toward him in a visible and apparent manner, even if he is undeserving of this? And later on we're going to even emphasize this, that this is problematic even to say because of the issues of reward and punishment and so on. Section 5. The above questions can be resolved in light of an adage of the Tzemach Tzedek quoted frequently by my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe Rayatz. Someone had begged him, the Tzemach Tzedek, to intercede in order to arouse heaven's mercies upon a person who was dangerously ill. The Tzemach Tzedek answered, Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think positively and the outcome will be positive. It is apparent from the response of the Tzemach Tzedek that thinking positively, having bitachon, will in itself give rise to results that are visibly and manifest good. So the question is also, what is it about thinking positively that will bring that about, that A follows B, or B follows A? Because you're thinking positively, that's why the outcome will be positive. Why is that way? This teaching may be explained as follows. The obligation of betachon, which we are commanded to cultivate, is not merely a component and a corollary of one's faith, emunah, that everything is the hands of Hashem and that He is compassionate and merciful. Such an obligation would not need to be stated separately. You wouldn't need to have a special obligation of betachon to do that. You say you have to believe in Hashem, and you believe that everything comes from Hashem. It's all part of emunah. It's not betachon. Emunah means you believe in Hashem, you believe that He runs the world, and you believe that the good and bad comes from Him, and you believe that He is just in what He does, and therefore, if something negative happens to a person, it's from Hashem's mercy and so on. The word betachon means there's something other than emunah, and that's betachon. Rather, the obligation of betachon is an avodah of its own, a separate path of avodas Hashem, divine service, that motivates a person to rely and depend on Hashem alone to the extent that he casts his lot entirely upon Him. As it is written, Hashlech al Hashem Yehovacha, cast your burden upon Hashem, meaning depend on no other support in the world apart from Hashem. It could be that this is what the author of the Chayvus Halavavos had in mind when he wrote that a person's betachon should resemble that of, he quotes the Chayvus Halavavos, a bondman imprisoned in a dungeon who is dependent upon the authority of his master. That prisoner's trust is directed only towards his master, to whom he is subordinate, and no man other than he can harm or help him. It follows, the Rebbe says, that our trust in Hashem is such that our actual material situation is of no consequence. Even if it is impossible for a person to be saved according to the natural order, like the Rebbe mentioned earlier in the Sicha, he relies on Hashem, who is not restricted by nature at all. This itself is the foundation, the basis for a person's trust and betachon that Hashem will bestow visible and manifest good upon him, even if he's not worthy of His kindness. This trust in Hashem is the reason why he can get Hashem's kindness, as he's about to explain. For the definition of trust is not mere belief that because the kindness of Hashem is utterly measureless and unlimited and can be extended to a person whether he is worthy or not, he will receive Hashem's kindness without any effort on his own part. That's not what betachon means. Betachon does not mean Hashem doesn't discriminate, Hashem doesn't judge, Hashem doesn't care what a person does, or even if Hashem does care, His kindness is infinite, and infinite kindness can go anywhere into any person. The Rebbe says, logically, we must say that that is not the case. And he says in the parentheses, were this to be true, that Hashem's kindness is equal and the same whether a person does wrong or not, the entire concept of schar v'oinish, reward and punishment, would be nullified, because then how can you say that a person that does good is rewarded and a person that doesn't do good is punished? Hashem's kindness is infinite, it goes to all. Therefore, rather, betachon involves labor and exertion, avoida and yegia within one's soul, and it is this effort and exertion that evokes Hashem's kindness. Because I work on myself and I am doing internal effort to bring myself to this peace of mind, that is why I have earned Hashem's kindness in return. When a person truly trusts in Hashem alone, from the depth of his soul, to the extent that he has no worry at all, that is the gauge that he is truly trusting in Hashem. How do you determine that the person is trusting Hashem or not? Your level of worry, your level of serenity. This very arousal of trust that the person does within himself through much work internally evokes a reciprocal response from Hashem. In other words, midah keneged midah, as it's known, granting him kindness, even when without taking this trust into account, he would not be worthy of such kindness. If a person would not be worthy of kindness, then he would normally not get it, but only when he trusts, despite not being worthy, working on his betachon, having this avodah v'yegia b'nafshay, brings out that Hashem is going to do this for him despite his unworthiness. This is what is meant by the command, B'tach b'Hashem, to trust in Hashem, that a person should cast his burden upon Hashem, Hashlech al Hashem Yehovachom, relying on Him to grant him visible and manifest good, since he trusts Hashem alone, without calculating whether it is possible for him to be saved according to the natural order that we said before. Nothing can stop Hashem, not the rules of nature either. This causes a corresponding response towards him in the spiritual realms. When he believes in Hashem so strongly, he trusts in Hashem so strongly, God protects him and has pity on him. Even if his own tally, if you calculate what he is worth, shows that he does not deserve to be granted the kind of good that is visible and manifest good. This is the meaning of the adage of the Tzemach Tzedek cited above. Bitachon itself will lead to positive results. Like we asked before, why does Bitachon lead, why does Tracht Gut bring to Sein Gut? This principle is not a tangential element of our trust in Hashem. The idea of Tracht Gut. It defines the nature of trust that we are commanded to have. This is what the trust is. So he says in section 6, now we're going back to the Pshutei Shel Mikra that Rashi is trying to communicate to us. Based on above, it is possible to say that this is what is meant by the mention of Moshe's fear when he heard his fellow Jew say, "Do you intend to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" The pasuk, the verse seeks to teach this fundamental message with regard to the quality of Bitachon. That it is Bitachon itself that brings about Hashem's salvation. The opposite is also true. When a person is not saved from distress, why is that so? The reason is that his Bitachon is lacking. This is the intent of the verse. And Vayira Moshe, Vayomer Achanoi Nadavar, that Moshe became frightened and he said that the matter has indeed become known. And directly after that we had told, Vayishma Pari ve'vakish largis Moshe v'yivrach Moshe. Pari heard and he sought to kill Moshe. Moshe feared for his life despite having performed good deeds. He had protected a Jewish man from the Egyptian who was beating him and rebuked two Jews who were quarreling. So he was doing two good things. He was being Mekayim, the mitzvah of Atzolos Nefashos. He was saving a Jewish life. And he was being Mekayim a mitzvah of Echech Techiach, of rebuking someone. So he was in a state where he should have taken that the furthest degree and had confidence and trust in Hashem that Hashem will save him. His failure to trust in Hashem, that no harm would befall him, was itself the cause for Pari to hear of the matter and seek to kill him. Moshe's lack of trust caused him to have to flee for his life, just like we said, Tracht gut mit sein gut, that the very thinking positively, the very working on one's trust is what brings about that Hashem should be kind to us despite any failings we will have. So the reverse of this comes into play as well. When a person doesn't bring their trust into being, so then they have lost that protection that Hashem would have manifested. And the Rebbe adds a further nuance based on what it says in the pasuk. One might explain that this is the intent of the wording Vayomer, that he said that Vayomer Achin Noida Hadavar. He said, and the matter has indeed become known. Not only did Moshe think these thoughts within his heart, he also expressed them in speech. This increases the emphasis on his lack of bitachon, for in addition to having his apprehension in his mind, he verbalized it, like the Rebbe speaks about in the footnote, the importance of verbalization, both in good things and the power of verbalization in negative. So it's one thing to think negative thoughts. It's even worse when a person, chas v'sholom, gives voice to it, and that is even a greater negative thing and can have negative consequences. Had he manifest complete bitachon Hashem and not worried at all about his circumstances, that the matter had indeed become known and could be discovered by Paroi, that itself would have caused the matter to have been forgotten and would have brought him visible and manifest good. From all of the above, one can also get a hirah l'maisa apoyel. One can also derive a practical directive. When a person encounters obstacles and hindrances in his observance of Torah and its mitzvahs, so the Rebbe extends this not just to a person's own material well-being, but also we know the Chavis Alvavas actually speaks about it, that one has to also have bitachon in doing Torah mitzvahs. That as long as he does whatever he's got to do, he has to bitachon that Hashem will help him fulfill this mitzvah, for example. So the Rebbe is applying this, that when a person has what's called manias v'ikuvim in the expression of the Rebbe, on the observance of Torah mitzvahs, he should realize that the elimination of those obstacles depends upon him and his conduct, meaning his state of mind, his positive thinking. Tracht gut. If he has absolute trust that Hashem will help him and change the situation to the point that he is utterly at ease without any worry at all, his bitachon will bear fruit. At the same time, of course, he must also take whatever natural steps are dependent upon him in order to remove those obstacles, just like in any situation where a person cannot just have bitachon in Hashem, that I'm going to be able to, have food without doing anything to get the food, etc., etc. And the reason why you can rely on Hashem, that Hashem will definitely take care of any obstacles in Torah mitzvahs, for we have been given the promise relayed by the Tzemach Tzedek, think positively and the outcome will be positive. Tracht gut wird sein gut. We can rest assured that this will actually take place and that all the obstacles and hindrances will cease to exist and things will be good for us in a real and practical sense, with the kind of good that is overt and manifest even to the eyes of flesh in the here and now, openly revealed good. And now the Rebbe is going to say this same type of level of bitachon has to be applied concerning the Geula as well. Just as concerning the redemption from Egypt, the Yitzias Mitzrayim, Gulas Mitzrayim. The sages teach that b'schus habitachon nigelu Yisrael Mitzrayim, by virtue of their trust, the people of Israel were redeemed from Egypt. So too with regard to the Geula of this last Gulas, redemption of this last exile, the Medrash states, they are deserving of the Geula redemption in beschar, in reward, just for their hope alone. The Rebbe concludes with a bracha, may this be fulfilled for us, that by virtue of the Jewish people's trust and the promise that Hashem might deliver is soon to come, we will merit, they will haste, redeem us with true and ultimate redemption. May this take place speedily and in our own days.